All right. Welcome back, everyone, to this not a podcast that we call the Information Exchange. We four are glad to be back together. It's been a long time since we've all been in town. We had traveled to Palm Springs, which was really rough. Brendan and I had to, suck it up and go enjoy Southern California. And I've been busy, it's really hard to watch all the Spurs games because hopefully by the time we release this, they'll be in the Western Conference Finals. And Brad, with your football team behind you, was in England for a little while, checking out the EPL.
For all of our big audience in Leeds.
Yeah,
They're very
exactly.
excited to see this.
Shout out to Leeds United. Well, Brad, why don't you get us kicked off? What's first on our agenda today?
Oh, well, I was in England, so I missed some things and I came back to it's been a flurry of lawsuits at the beginning of the year, as Brendan has helpfully covered. Seems like Epic is not active in the courts, and now they're active in our newsrooms. We got podcasts, Freakonomics with Judy, and then Katie Couric, a former coworker of mine. If you want to hear that story, Yahoo and AOL merged. We don't need to go into that section of my life. But I did
Unsurprising.
ride the elevator with her one time, and she was very lovely. Yeah, Judy's out there at the young age of, am I right in saying 79? Does anybody know for certain?
I think they said
That's
82 on the interview.
82. Man. Well, one thing I'll say is she was at Hims in a leather jacket and she looked sick. So 82 looks good on Judy. And she's not slowing down.
Are
Maybe
leather
president is
jackets?
next.
I'm not trendy as evidence, Waldo here, but
Waldo, yeah.
are leather jackets in? Like, is that a trendy look?
I think if you're
Did
rich
leather
enough,
jackets ever go out? It's just that you have to have the right vibe.
meaner. Yeah.
Yeah.
New York man is the trendy one of the four of us. We'll take that word. Ryan, what do you think? Did you see any of those interviews?
Yeah, I watched the Katie Couric one. The whole time we were at Epic, very quiet in terms of anything external facing. Judy did meet with folks internally quite a bit and would regularly talk at our monthly staff meetings. And so we heard from her a lot, but there was never really anything publicly facing. Now that all these lawsuits have started happening, maybe some perceptions that were a little brighter have started to turn. It's interesting that she starts to speak up. Maybe that's the more cynical side of me talking there, but she, in my opinion, does not have the best media training. I think the lack of like the past 30 or 40 years of doing any public facing interviews is quite evident. Katie Couric was like very amicable to start. She was even trying to draw some lines between like her path and like the difficulty of being a woman in an industry where it's really surrounded by men and how they've kind of both succeeded. And so she was trying to like maybe find some camaraderie there. That felt pretty flat. And then my favorite portion of the interview was she started to talk about like Epic's culture, and it was a true like shit sandwich tactic by Katie Couric, where she talked very highly of the campus, of the art around the campus, and then she mixed in. It seems to be a bit like Lumon on steroids, with which, if you all have
No
watched
way.
Severance, is it's like not at all a compliment, but I don't think Judy got the reference at all.
It just blew right by it, and there were
It's-
laughs. And I was like, wait a minute. And I think that's something worth noting. Like, Freakonomics was kind of a puff piece, like, was really positive. The Katie Couric one, definitely, she dug in, but like with that zinger, but also some questions.
Yeah, I do wish she followed up a little bit more, like held her a little more to the fire, but also she's at the Epic conference. I wouldn't be able to do that personally. There's also like definitely some analogy to be drawn there about Lumen internally, the innies versus the outside world who might see Lumen as kind of a like corporate business that's succeeding. I do think there's tales to be told about Epic there. So yeah, it's just very interesting how this is all playing out, for especially for someone who worked there for 5 years and there was nothing at all that would ever be put out like this during that time.
We have three former Annies right here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Brainwashed.
what's the opposite of severance again? Reassimilation or something? That's what we must have done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What I'll say about it all is that they are changing, right? They've hired marketing people. They start to allow outsiders to come to UGM. They have somebody who's like chief meme officer, not that title, but like is running the started Twitter account and social media since last fall. So like clearly something is changing. And then they've done, some of the biggest podcasts in the industry, right? Katie Couric's huge. Freakonomics is a household brand. And then they had acquired last spring. All they need is Joe Rogan, and we're set.
Calling in here, Judy smoking a blunt on Joe Rogan. It's
We
gonna
we
end
determine
health tech.
we tremendous break the internet. I mean, and even on, I think it was the Couric interview, Katie said something to Judy like, "Hey, what's changed for you recently?" And she's like, "Well, I never had to used to do these sorts of interviews." So I think she's being pushed by maybe some of her policy people, maybe some of her marketing people to start to project outwards more. And she's done that Forbes interview, like a year ago. All of this to say is that they're trying to actually shape their external opinion, because they have strong belief in the good things that they're doing in this world and the good things they're doing for healthcare, and realizing that now with their posture in the industry, they need to project outward and influence those perceptions that are out there, because otherwise the lawsuits continue to pile up and the sentiment becomes a thing of its own will and its own snowball effect.
When I worked at Epic from 2015 to barely 2017, the theory was like, we let our work speak for itself. Our customers will speak highly about us to other customers. What more could you need, in the way of marketing, especially because it's not like you run a Super Bowl ad about your electronic health record. But it's funny to think like, well, now that the sort of perspective on Epic, a perspective about Epic has saturated the market, everyone has heard of it. Everyone either has it, or they're being forced to move to it, or they want to move to it, or they hate it. And now it's like, yeah, all of a sudden it's like, well, there's word of mouth has kind of run its route in terms of a marketing strategy. And Brendan, you were saying maybe the internal team at Epic is pushing her to be more public. I was just thinking customers are probably saying, listen, if we're going to be an Epic shop, if Mayo Clinic is going to be an Epic shop, if Cleveland Clinic is going to be an Epic shop, and the CMS is always banging on our door, and et cetera, we're named in lawsuits because of data that was leaked through a nationwide trust framework, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, are those CIOs or those CEOs, approaching Epic and saying like, you all got to get a handle on this?
Okay, so we had Lumon in the Couric interview. And then, but in the Freakonomics interview, they're like, we tried to find companies that were like Epic, and the only one that kept coming up was Patagonia. And I'm like, what? Patagonia?
That's like the totally opposite direction to me.
Which Patagonia makes both food now and beer. They have beer in the beer aisle. And I'm like, this is a conglomerate. I didn't know that was diversifying that. I don't think Epic's doing any of these things, because I would definitely try an Epic beer. I have no idea what it would be like. But digging into the interviews, there were some nuggets, particularly in the Freakonomics one, where it just showed how Judy and also Epic perceive themselves, right? She said something to the extent of, well, we're interoperable. We make the most APIs, right? We have more APIs. Look at all the APIs. We got so many APIs and HL7 inputs and things like that. And I don't think she's wrong. I know she's right, right? Because we have the little Claude Code script that pulls down all the APIs and stuff from the different EHR vendors, and it's more. There's more out there, more FHIR inputs and outputs, and more HL7 interfaces than the other EHR vendors. But that's not the point. The count of APIs and stuff is only one measure in the whole equation of, are you friendly to third parties? Like, is that easy to use? Is the documentation there to support people in understanding what it really does and how it interacts with your software? Are you inviting people into the ecosystem? Is the water warm? And I think, that if Epic continues to believe that just the sheer count is enough to change the opinion from really the developer crowd, the venture capital crowd that has a strong hold over Washington, has a strong hold over this administration and a loud voice, an influential voice, that's got to change. They've started to with the vendor services open at Epic conference, right? That got restarted last year and was a really good step to rebuilding a relationship with developers. But they have to do more. They have to continue to do more and push themselves for a model of co-opetition, of inviting in what are ostensibly competitors in many respects and competing with them, but also making the ecosystem where they can thrive. Like, that's hard. It's hard to strike that balance, but it's what other vendors do. It's what Athena Health does quite well.
I was about to ask if you had an example. I mean, it's hard within a capitalistic society for a company to say, let's spend resources on helping other companies. But you think Athena does that well? What, because they're just because of their API? It's not like they.
Not just
It's not
API,
like.
the way they invite you in, right? The way that it's documented, the way that they consistently have a change log that says what's changed, that they have a partner program where they're trying to to engage with you. The challenge is that any company, the maximal capture of revenue from a provider client or from any client as a software company is when they use all your products, right? If you're selling a CRM, you can capture 100% of their CRM spend. If you are taking a cut of API transactions to a CRM third party, you're only capturing a smaller portion of that. From a pure math perspective, your system of record are biased towards building your own software and foreclosing third parties. That's why things get bundled in every vertical. Information blocking changes that equation for EHRs, for healthcare. It's a strong reason, even beyond the morality and ethical reasons of co-opetition, to just lean towards co-opetition. And Epic and other EHRs should take that to heart. Lean into this idea of co-opetition because they're still going to win a lot of these battles because the bundle still is appealing, because defaults are appealing. You can sort of piece together some of the mentality in the responses from Judy, and she was even a little bit more pointed later in the interview for Freakonomics, where they asked about antitrust. Are you worried about it? And she says, well, like, how could we possibly support all these if there's 50 developers for this dermatology app and there's 10 of those apps, that's 500 programmers, that's a waste. And so, like, from an economic efficiency standpoint, vertical integration, and it makes sense, and there's a math there that's true. Capitalism is inefficient. The inefficiency of redundancy and different things means there's a lot of wasted effort, but the net outcome is better than a single top-down approach. And that tension surfaced in the interview. Epic has to realize that the information blocking statute changes the equilibrium and the math here in a way that they should lean into. And we see different platforms starting to lean into.
So no disagreements, but I also think it's tough to not look at Judy is out here doing publicity for the first time since any of us have been alive. They're also just facing an onslaught of lawsuits left and right, but they're getting wins. None of us can read the tea leaves or know the future. I guess we can read the tea leaves and be wrong. How much of this feels like a defensive position that as they start to win in court, if they do start to win in court, they give up on these efforts of being more open? Put Judy's interviews aside, does vendor services stop being important to them if they're able to win in court?
I want to take that because I have an opinion about Epic here. To Brendan's point, like the most they offer the most functionality with regards to interoperability. That they're the first to release things when a regulation comes out that says you're going to need to release this by this date. They'll like beat the deadline by a long shot. And yeah, they're up against a bunch of folks who are angry that they've got a little garden right now. I feel like the biggest mistake that Epic makes, or I guess the thing that frustrates me the most, and Brendan, I think this speaks to why it feels like they're not in co-opetition. It feels like they're just exclusive. When you work at Epic, you just assume that everyone else doesn't know what they're talking about. And that's the part of their culture, in my opinion. Like, well, you don't understand how Epic works, so you probably can't help with my sepsis algorithm or something like that. And when the fact of the matter is, like, if you just gave this other company a little bit of data, they would have a sepsis algorithm that far, exceeds the capabilities of Epic's, which I think was notoriously bad. And so, anyway, that's the frustration. Is not like the efforts that they put into enabling developers. It's like the posture that they have towards those developers. It's like always one of distrust, always one of, well, you're gonna mess this up, always. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Like, Epic is non-homogeneous, a heterogeneous, large organization of 15,000 people, and some people are leaning. So, like, I struggle to be like assigned to any company of any size.
It just got compared to Lumon.
Yeah, but in general, people's greatest strengths also are their greatest weaknesses, and their paternalism, in the pejorative sense, is why they're so freaking effective at their installs and always hit their implementations. Is they come in opinionated and somehow train these 22 to 25-year-olds to go and lead these really messy implementations that in every industry, at system of record implementations take 2 years to install the ERP for the state of Kansas or something, and just delays and delays and whatever doesn't happen. And like, so their culture drives them to their success, but it also leads to, now that they've achieved that success, some real risks in terms of the antitrust posture, right? In terms of foreclosing competition, which by and large, I think antitrust law isn't well suited to go after them, as we've discussed before. And that these cases, I think they'll escape the antitrust ones. But information blocking, that's a much more pointed risk for them. It really does tackle some of their weaknesses, and forces them to say, what's the new equilibrium here in terms of that co-opetition? And I see positive incremental change over the last 2 years in that regard, in terms of the opening up of vendor services, in terms of the Open Epic conference. They just released 100 or something new kit APIs and vendor services publicly. So like, there's positive changes, but it's not do this one thing and solve. It's a continued change of culture, of ways of engaging.
It's not a module you develop. It's very operational and an operational drain. But yeah, that's a really interesting point that you make. Like, I was just looking at someone working in Cerner or Oracle earlier today and thinking technology looks fine, looks just as boring as every EHR. And it got me thinking, like, man, are the services at Epic just that much better? Like, the install team that much more effective than 50 people from Deloitte? And is that paternalism, to your point, Brendan, really what keeps them focused and creating best practices and things like that?
There's a big difference between like the anti-competitive behavior and the anti-openness to development. I think, like, Brad, you're asking for a prediction of what will happen. I think the antitrust stuff, if that starts to die down, maybe we'll see Judy be pulled back a little bit, like the executive, like, overall market facing side of the organization. I think that might start to shrink a little bit. The vendor services side, I've never personally felt that they were anti being open to integration. It's just they want to control the route that it takes. And so anything that ends up landing into their software, they very much want to control how that looks. And I think that comes from Price, as you said, just skepticism when it comes to the other side's development and what that might look like coming into their products. And I think they have some rights to want to control that too. I see them keeping with, especially if info blocking sticks around, which it looks like it will, sticking with the vendor services stuff, like more openness towards integration, not so much the marketing side. And also, just before we get off of this topic, Epic, one thing you learn as you're an employee there, most folks will kind of go through it. There's like a big culling around the 2-year mark and then the 5-year mark where people leave. Every once in a while, you have a special case where somebody will actually come back, and they call that a boomerang. And I just want to say, I think it's a big missed opportunity if they did not reach out to our Waldo here for that chief meme officer. Did they ever contact you, Brendan? Because that would be the opportunity for a Brendan boomerang that I think would make the most sense.
I've not received anything yet. Maybe it's gone to spam. We'll have to see.
Got to check it.
In terms of tactically, Brad, the court cases, right? We're in a period of like regulatory slowdown. We had like a real flurry of CMS Health Tech Ecosystem, CMS 0057, CMS 00662, and before that HTI 5. We're in the lull of like them finalizing HTI 5 and HTI 6 coming up, but the litigation is for a bunch of interesting points, right? Particle and Epic has been in this phase 1 discovery that they just sort of wrapped, and now they're butting heads saying, well, Epic saying, we want to do a summary judgment. We want to close this puppy off. The definition sucks. Let's get out of here. They're trying to end that case. And Particle saying, no, we proved what we had to. Let's move to the phase 2, the broader discovery. And so we should see a decision there coming up, which will be exciting. I think the judge will hear the summary judgment motion and then may choose to move forward, is my guess. Epic does have pretty good grounds if they get the trial in terms of the market definition. But antitrust is really hard to use against systems of record, because systems of record rarely get to the size and market penetration of 70% or 80% that is usually indicative of traditional antitrust. And antitrust is changing a lot right now, but still, if you only have 41% market share, it's a tougher case to make, especially if you're in front of a judge with a more traditionalist view on what markets are.
And just to be clear there,
6.9% of hospital beds, though.
Oh, but not 70.
Still,
Less.
still
Yeah, yeah,
low by antitrust measures, and so just antitrust as a tool is really well geared towards network-based businesses, like the train networks, right? Break up the train networks, because networks tend to move towards ubiquity, move towards really strong market control, like SureScripts, right? SureScripts had antitrust against them.
They specifically let the virtuous cycle continue to succeed if they, close off competitors or purchase competitors, and all of a sudden it's a special type of differentiation if you have the ubiquitous network instead of a network. That's useful.
Right. It's not linearly tied. Every new node is exponentially more valuable in a network-based business.
And I want to clarify too, you're saying systems of record rarely reach that 70% threshold that maybe is arbitrary, but sort of indicates potentially a monopoly. But they get blamed for antitrust all the time because of how challenging it is to switch away from them. Is that the idea? Like how challenging it is to be a new market entrant and compete
Yep.
effectively?
Yeah, because switching costs for these type of software, it's again nonlinear. It's like the bigger they
They're locked in.
are, then it's the exponential switching costs. And so these types of software, EHRs, but also ERPs, systems of record, fail what's called the SNP test, right? The small but significant increase in price. And so in traditional economics applied to antitrust, if you were to change the price of a product and increase it with a small significant amount, would that cause people to switch to an alternative? And for like a bottle of Pepsi, yeah, you'd switch to Coke, right? And so then that hypothetical monopolist test fails. In the case of systems of record, well, you could raise the price a little bit and you're like, man, the cost of me moving is 10x that, it's 100x that. And you see that in class reports, not just for Epic, but for EHRs, where they say, yeah, I'd move my EHR, but it's too expensive. Like the class report just came out and a bunch of people said that about Oracle. They said, I would change off of Oracle like 33% or something, but I'm not going to because it's too much work. And so this type of software almost uniformly, even for non-market dominant EHRs and systems of record, fail this test. It's the paradox of antitrust applied to systems of record, that it can be both not hitting the metrics needed for market penetration, but also kind of universally failing the SNP test. All this to say, I'm not optimistic in just a general principle towards the particle case, towards the Texas versus Epic case, which is another antitrust case. And then Cure.is versus Epic is an antitrust case, but also an information blocking case. So it's a little bit got more levers to pull there potentially.
The spin-off movie and the epic cinematic litigative universe.
Yeah, the collab, right? The crossover event we've been waiting for. But we should see action on most of these, right? Cure is having some interesting developments on their discovery. And AADJ, the American Association for Disability Justice, that sued Epic for antitrust. The brief by Epic is due today, so we should have some a juicy response from Epic by midnight tonight.
Can't wait.
All right, enough about litigation. What if we cut over and talk a little bit about the CMS?
Ooh, yeah.
What's happened, Price? Do you know?
You talking about the CMS health tech ecosystem adding a new vertical of workflow, new bodies of participants, but this is for the electronic prior authorization, which, by the way, shout out Kaylin Owens. Apparently, one of my good friends from college was on stage with Dr. Oz when he made this announcement of the CMS. She works for Axios, and she's really badass. So Kaylin Owens will not listen to this, but she's great. So they announced this past week that they're adding electronic prior authorization to the list of use cases that the CMS health tech ecosystem is for. Is that right?
Yeah, they're creating a new pledge category.
Pledge category. Ryan, what did you take away from this? Have you read through it?
I have a bit. I think the main takeaway is who it's for. The payer provider side is very much included. Clearinghouses, I think, were snubbed out of this, maybe purposely so. But I thought that was interesting because most of the transacting that happens on that level that I'm aware of, and that the folks who are preparing for electronic prior authorization, lots of clearinghouses. So it seems like the government is actually trying to direct away from the usage of clearinghouses based on what they're trying to incentivize here.
Right. So you could be an EHR, you can be a provider, you can be a payer, or you could be a network to pledge into this use case. Okay, maybe a clearinghouse could pledge as a network, but not in the way the health tech ecosystem is structured, right? If you do the pledge as a specific category, like a data network, it's kind of all or nothing, right? You have to go and do facilitate patient access. You have to go and provide treatment, the treatment exchange. You have to facilitate the operations exchange from payers to providers. You have to go full bore into all of the pledge pieces.
Which they're just not positioned at all to do so.
Yeah, right. Totally. You're asking a clinical administrative network to be a clinical network.
I pulled up the press release here. We've got providers that are committing, and then we've got electronic health records that are committing. So presumably that's the submitting system of the electronic prior authorization would be the EHR instead of point solutions or clearinghouses who could help out. And then the networks are BeWell, Commonwealth, eHealth Exchange, No2. Those are CMS aligned networks. They're already, used to exchanging clinical data and sort of easier for them to tack on Da Vinci type transactions with regards to prior authorization requests. You're saying that's easier than like a clearinghouse like Change all of a sudden becoming a full-on FHIR network and CDA network. Is that what you're saying, Brendan? Like one of them is easier to transition into both administrative and clinical?
Yeah, I mean, prior authorization is one of those use cases that if you squint from one vantage point, you're like, well, it's always been in HIPAA administrative transactions. It's an administrative transaction. It's in the clearinghouse and payer provider data exchange lens. But then you squint from another vantage point and you're like, wait a minute, this is a clinical transaction because inherently you need to be sending a bunch of clinical information across the wire. For a while, there were these two domains that the administrative transactions did a lot of X12 and were very payer-led work groups like AHIP or WEDI. And then you have the HL7 and other work groups doing the clinical stuff, DDA and the HIEs, and never in the middle shall they meet. Well, now in the middle they're meeting time and time again, and it's leading to friction points as the different players want to use different standards, right? Maybe use X12 or use FHIR, as well as this. This is a manifestation of this where it's like, okay, this is kind of gearing things to run over the clinical data rails, right? All the networks that are pledging are clinical data networks. So the ones that pledge to prior auth are BeWell, Commonwealth, eHealth Exchange, and No2, all clinical data networks.
As a network pledging to the prior auth section, don't you also just need to be a CMS aligned network, meaning they have to serve all of the use cases? So they're given that they've been doing this for the past year, they're particularly well positioned to say, yeah, we'll do that one too, when in reality, like a clearinghouse might already have the infrastructure that's prepared to serve this use case a lot better, actually.
Yeah, and that's the tension, right, that we'll see play out. The thing that I like about what the CMS health tech ecosystem is doing is saying, okay, everyone's off like building in their little corner to meet CMS 0057 or HTI 4. We're going to convene. And like that's been a theme of the health tech ecosystem is convening and building a space for dialogue at a very rapid pace. Plus for that, but at the same time, you kind of squint, you're implicitly maybe building winners and losers or trying to orient towards the clinical data side of the house, which, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it certainly seems like the outcome that is being affected. And so there's a tension there between, we only have 9 months left of this bad boy until CMS 0057 is required for CMS plans, right? Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, and
7
ACA
months, right?
plans. Oh boy, it's May, not March. I have 2 kids. That's my brain is scrambled. But yeah, so 7 months, and the convening might be happening a little late given the balls that are in the air. Is that the right
Yeah.
metaphor?
Yeah. Well, really, the die have been cast, is what it seems like. And I'm kind of like, I hope nobody is still picking their prior auth vendor for, the
Well, we
regulation
know
date.
we know that they are.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Definitely.
Yeah, given the various prospects and the
Well,
RFPs we've seen out there, there's certainly a lot of things to be finalized in the market.
Jumping in, this is all exciting. We're friends with a lot of people that work at these companies, and it's good to see the collaboration. In fact, it makes any conference that much spicier and interesting. But the clipboard is still breathing, and so every new one of these to me is an increased chance of failure. In all things, a lack of constraint means you can focus. Every administration has a clock running against it, right? Like the day they get into the office, they know that there are, okay, Ryan, Jesus, let's
Well, we
pretend.
hope.
Okay, reasonably, everybody at CMS should understand that there is a time when they will leave working for the government and they would like to show something for it. But like, are we actually changing something for patients? And I can tell you, I went to NYU just recently where I get all of my healthcare and like they have everything about me and they're still handing me a clipboard to ask me like, is everything right? So
It's been 6 months. They've been super effective.
it's not been 6 months. It's been almost a year. We're almost at the birthday party.
They kicked off a year ago, but like in reality, everything got going, October, November, December. That is warp speed for doing stuff in the government. And so I give a lot of credit to the health tech EU system for advancing identity proofing discussions, advancing patient access discussions, like prototyping and building, putting stuff out into market, which is a necessary prerequisite for the ONC and other regulatory bodies to require things in rules. And so did it get rid of the clipboard at NYU? No, but like, did it prove stuff out? If it proves stuff out in market, then they can go and require it in rule. And that is what the whole point is not to get to ubiquity. It's to prove stuff out in market such that they can go and say, shelt via HTI 6 or another rule.
All right, I'm not going to argue with you about this, but
Next time we're together with a beer, we can just fisticuffs or something.
maybe Amy Gleason is Simone Biles and she's going to get all around gold. We are all hoping for it. We are all hoping for, but like, sometimes I just want to see a gymnast that is fantastic at floor routine and we're confident they're going to win a gold. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that is a great metaphor for us to end on today. This has been a great episode of the Information Exchange.
Wild ride.
See you guys next week.
Thanks all.
Tens
See ya.
all around.